The first rays of dawn painted the desert in soft gold, but the silence was broken by the creak of iron chains. A young Apache woman, her eyes fierce and proud, glared at the cowboy standing before her. He had risked everything to reach her, to cut the chains that bound her to a life she never chose. Yet, instead of gratitude, his heart raced as she spat words that chilled him to the bone. "I'd rather die than be yours." The cowboy, roughened by years on the trail and hardened by countless dangers, had never faced a defiance like this. She wasn't just resisting him, she was resisting a world that had tried to break her spirit. Every step he had taken to find her, every danger he had faced, now came to this moment of truth. And still, the Apache woman stood unyielding, her courage blazing brighter than the morning sun. In that tense desert dawn, a silent battle of wills unfolded. Would he be able to earn her trust? Or would centuries of pain and mistrust keep her locked in fear? As the wind whispered through the canyons and the chains fell to the ground, the question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. This isn't just a story of captivity and freedom, it's a story of courage, pride, and the impossible choices people make when honor and heart collide. And as the desert held its breath, the cowboy and the Apache woman faced a moment that could change both their lives forever. The Apache woman's hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of the life she had been forced to endure. For years, she had been taken from her people, held in a world that felt cold and every sound, every shadow, reminded her of the chains that had once held her, the ones that had tried to strip away her spirit. And now, here was this cowboy, standing in the soft light of dawn, cutting the last of her bindings with calm determination, yet meeting only defiance in her eyes. He knew little of her past, but he could see it in the set of her jaw, the fire in her gaze. She had survived things he could barely imagine, and survival had made her strong, even unyielding. And yet, beneath that strength, he sensed a pain so deep it could shatter him if he let himself dwell on it. He wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but he had learned long ago that trust is earned, not demanded. The desert around them seemed endless, but the isolation only magnified the tension between them. Every glance, every cautious movement, carried the weight of history, of a world that had tried to break her spirit, and of his own code that refused to leave anyone behind. The morning wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust, as if the land itself were watching, waiting. Neither spoke, but their silence was loud with unspoken questions. Could freedom mean anything to someone who had been denied it for so long? Could a stranger ever become a protector instead of a captor? And somewhere, beyond the dunes, unseen eyes stirred, hinting that danger and choices were far from over. The Apache woman didn't move, even as the cowboy stepped back, letting the last of the chains clatter to the rocky ground. Her eyes, dark and unblinking, followed his every move, reading him like a map she had memorized long ago. She didn't trust easily, how could she, after everything she had endured? And yet, there was something in his presence, something quiet and unassuming, that made her hesitate, not because she trusted him, but because the possibility of choice, real choice, was both terrifying and strange. The cowboy's mind raced with questions. Who had held her captive, and why? What enemies might still be tracking her across the desert? He had thought cutting the chains would be the hardest part, but now he realized the real challenge was earning her trust before danger found them. Somewhere deep in the canyons, shadows moved with purpose, hinting at the unseen threats waiting for the moment to strike. Every sound of shifting sand, every distant bird, seemed to carry a warning as they moved slowly through the sparse desert. The Apache woman's thoughts drifted to her people, the family she had been torn from, the friends she had lost, and the homeland that still lived in her heart. She had survived by keeping her spirit unbroken, but she knew she couldn't do it alone forever. Still, the idea of relying on a stranger, even one who had freed her, filled her with unease. The cowboy, aware of her silent judgment, chose his words carefully. He spoke of safety, of shelter, and of paths through the desert where danger might lurk. But every offer of help was met with her sharp resistance. A reminder that freedom was more than Chen-sit, was the right to refuse, to fight, to survive on her own terms. And so, with the sun climbing higher, the desert became both a battlefield and a sanctuary. Neither knew what lay ahead, bandits, soldiers, or the ghosts of her past. But one truth was clear: the journey had only begun, and every step would test courage, loyalty, and the fragile threads of trust forming between them. By late afternoon, the desert sun had burned the horizon gold, and the shadows of the canyons grew long and sharp. The Apache woman moved cautiously, her eyes constantly scanning every ridge, every dip in the sand. The cowboy followed at a careful distance, his hand never straying far from the rifle slung across his shoulder. Silence stretched between them like a taut rope. Neither spoke much, but the tension was almost unbearable. Every rustle of wind, every distant hoofbeat, made their hearts skip a beat. She had begun to sense that he wasn't like the others. He didn't seek to control her, and yet his presence was oddly protective. Still, trust didn't come easily, and her pride wouldn't allow it yet. Behind her sharp gaze, the weight of fear and the memories of captivity simmered. Each step she took was a test of her courage. Each glance back a reminder that danger might already be tracking them, unseen but imminent. The cowboy, meanwhile, felt the pressure mounting. He had led them away from known paths, hoping to throw off anyone following, but the desert was unforgiving. Sand shifted beneath their boots, hiding pitfalls and the tracks of potential enemies. He knew that one wrong move could mean disaster, not just for him, but for the Apache woman whose life now seemed tied to his dot. As the sun dipped lower, the wind carried whispers of movement in the distance, figures silhouetted against the fading light. Riding fast, shadows that promised confrontation, heart-pounding. The cowboy glanced at the Apache woman. Her eyes, still fierce and unyielding, met his for the first time with something more than defiance. A flicker of wary alliance. The moment stretched, the tension unbearable. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Whoever those riders were, they weren't coming for words, they were coming for a fight. And as the first distant shouts pierced the air, both knew that the dawn of freedom was about to collide with the storm of danger, and only courage, cunning, and sheer will would decide who survived. The distant riders drew closer, their silhouettes sharper against the dying light, and the cowboy's stomach twisted with unease. He had expected danger, but not like this. The figures weren't strangers, they were a small group of soldiers, but their banners were tattered, and their armor worn. Something about their presence didn't sit right. They didn't seem to be chasing random travelers, they were searching for someone, and the intensity in their eyes suggested they knew exactly who. The Apache woman stiffened, her hand instinctively brushing the air as if sensing the wind carried more than sound. "They know me," she whispered, her voice low but edged with fear. The cowboy's heart sank. He had thought freeing her was the hardest part. Now, it seemed it might have been the easiest. Whatever chains had held her before, they had only been a fraction of the danger she still faced. As they crouched behind a jagged rock, the riders halted, scanning the desert as if guided by an invisible map. Then came the twist neither had anticipated. The lead soldier dismounted and called out, not with a demand or threat, but with a strange familiarity. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice carrying more than authority, it carried recognition, and perhaps a hidden agenda. The cowboy exchanged a glance with the Apache woman, whose eyes narrowed in shock and suspicion. Whoever this man was, his presence changed everything. The desert, once a place of potential refuge, had become a stage for secrets and betrayal. Every instinct screamed that the next moments would define their fate. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dust, sweat, and danger, and in that instant, both realized the fight for freedom wasn't just against chains or enemies. It was against the shadows of a past that refused to stay buried. The stakes had doubled, and neither knew who they could truly trust. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the jagged horizon, casting long shadows across the desert floor as the lead soldier stepped closer, his eyes locked on the Apache woman. The tension was unbearable. The cowboy moved instinctively, positioning himself between her and the approaching threat. Every muscle coiled like a spring, ready to snap. Then, with a sudden shift, the Apache woman's own hand went to the knife she had hidden beneath her cloak, a flash of steel catching the last light of day. "You don't know me," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the tense air. The soldier's expression flickered not with anger, but with shock, as if her words had stripped away a truth he had long hidden. In that heartbeat, the cowboy realized the shocking twist. The soldier wasn't there to capture her, he was her brother. Thought lost to the war, now returned under a false banner to test her courage and loyalty.